Hey there, I'm Joe Brady, and I'm here to take you through some enhancements and tips in both Lightroom and Photoshop to bring out the full color, the full light, the full beauty of your raw files. A lot of times we get an image out of our camera and you look in the back of the camera and it just doesn't look that great. Mostly it's because your camera doesn't see the way your eyes do. So we have to fix that. We have to make the images on the screen match what we saw with our eyes. So we're going to go over different ways to bring out that color, bring out that light, and add that pop back into the image. Now, one thing when you're doing color editing on your monitors is the first thing you need to do is you got to make sure that your monitor is displaying color correctly, because most of them are not. Typically what's going on is you have them set way too bright. And think about that. If you're editing based on what you see on your screen and your monitor is set too bright, well, what's going to happen when you send that out to print? You're going to get dark prints because you're judging what you see on here when in reality, this isn't showing you what's actually in the file. Now, if you're just sharing things on screens and everybody's got their monitors turned way up, well, that's okay. Then they're going to be pretty close. But if you're going out to print and you're in a more color critical situation, this thing has to be accurate. It's the first thing, because think about it. When you're judging color, when you're judging tone, when you're judging light, you're basing it on what you see here. And if this isn't correct, then all your edits are kind of guesswork. So we need to do something called a monitor calibration. Now I've got a new device, a new system here from X-Rite. This is the X-Rite i1 Display Studio. This is a colorimeter system that will make easy work of making your monitor perform to the best of its ability. Now you might see here that I have a 2-monitor system. You can calibrate both of them. So you just tell the software which monitor you want to calibrate. After you do that, will they match exactly? Actually, no. Unless they're exactly the same monitor and they're relatively expensive or relatively more higher end monitors. Why is that? Well, everything is constructed differently. If you have 2 of the exact same model of monitor, yeah, okay, then it's going to match pretty closely. But when you have 2 different brands, 2 different levels of monitor, chances are your $800 monitor is going to have trouble matching your $200 monitor, nor would you want to. You want to go with the $800 one. In this case, I've got 2 pretty good monitors here, so I can calibrate both of them, but again, subject for another day. We're not here really to spend all our time talking about calibration, but just how important it is that what you see on here is correct. Here's the device I'm going to be using. I mentioned this is the new X-Rite i1 Display Studio, and you got to do this. This isn't optional if you're going to be doing your own printing, because what's going to happen is you're going to waste a lot of time printing. If you're printing on your own printer, you're going to go through a handful of prints before you get the one you want. That's expensive and time consuming. 2, if you're sending out to a lab, then you're going to get prints back that you're not really happy with. So look right here. I'm going to calibrate my monitor. Okay, you got that? All right. I'm not going to do a full demo on this. I will show you how it works and what it does, and we'll just cut to the chase. But once this is done, then we know that the monitor is displaying color to the best of its ability. So before we do our color editing, our light editing, our tonal editing, let's take a look at what we can do to get our monitor calibrated. Now this is the i1 Studio software. I have the i1 Display Studio in my hand, and this works with a couple of different devices. So it's asking first which one you have. So let's go ahead and click that, and we're going to calibrate the display. Now notice it does see that I have 2 monitors here. And if you're not sure, if you click on here, you see all these options and you have no idea what it is, guess what? Just go with what it picked. It's probably pretty close. Now we're going to go photo. And then you have these other defaults. In general, again, the defaults are going to be correct. D65 is where you want to be. There's some people that have said, well, you're doing prints, you should be at 5000K, not 6500K. They're wrong. So go with that. As far as luminance goes, 120 is about as high as you ever want to be. And it kind of depends on the environment you're in. Anything above 120, your blacks and your shadows are going to starting to look a little unnaturally light. Lower is better. It all depends on how dim the working environment you have is. If you're in a room that you typically keep dimmer, then I would go 80 or 100. But 120 is a default standard, so we can go for that. Tonal response curve 2.2, you want to stick with there. Flare correct has to do with glare coming off the monitor. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to keep this nice and simple. So just follow the buttons. So on the bottom right, we have next. We want to make this thing just simple as can be. So we click on start the measurement process, and then it's going to tell us do this to the device. There's a little cover over top of the lens. You just flip that over, and then it tells you hang it from the monitor, and just make sure that your monitor has a little bit of a tilt to it. By the way, you do not have to dim the room lights for this because the device itself, the colorimeter, is flush up against the screen, so you don't have to be in a dark room. So I've got the device hanging in the middle of the monitor. I just click on next, and off it goes. So this part is not particularly exciting to watch. We'll just let it go and do its thing, and then I will come back at the end. So here we see after it's gone and adjusted for the brightness, it is showing that my monitor is set at 104, not 120. So I can bring the brightness up a little bit. Let's see what one click of the brightness, yeah, brings me right up to 121. That was lucky. You don't have to be exactly on. If the best you can get it is within 10 or 15 points, that's fine. Just do that. So then I'll hit next, and then it will go ahead and do its color profile calibration. I'm going to get coffee while this is doing its thing. All right, so it's done the measurement of all the color patches. We take the device off of the screen, click on next, and you can see this is actually showing before and after patches of what was seen before and what happened after the calibration. Give it a name. I like to call it the computer monitor that it was plus the date. And what is it? It is 3/31/20. Now, there's two different versions. There's version 2 and there's version 4 of these profiles. Version 4 is more updated, technically a little bit better. However, if you have any older softwares on your system, version 2 is a little bit more compatible. So I'm just going to leave it there. You can set a profile reminder. I'm not going to, we'll leave it for 4 weeks. This is a relatively new computer. How often should you calibrate? Depends on the age of your monitor. If you have a relatively new monitor, once a month is great. However, for me, if I'm about to send a whole bunch of prints out to the lab and I want to do a final color check, visual check on them, then I will do a profile right before that so I know I'm seeing the best color possible on the screen. Then I simply click on Save Profile, and it automatically gets saved, plus it gets implemented. You don't have to do anything else. Just hit OK, click on Home, and we're done. Now we know that our monitor is showing us the best color that it is capable of doing. Now it's time to go into software and do some color edits. So I mentioned both Lightroom and Photoshop. They handle color a little differently, but they have a couple of tools in there that will allow you to see on your monitor your print before you even get there. Before we get to that point, I'm going to break this down into two pieces. I'm going to do one for Lightroom and one for Photoshop because the color controls and the color previewing are in different places. So let's start with Lightroom, and then we'll do Photoshop. So here we have a beautiful scene in the Develop module in Lightroom, and it obviously has some color and some tonal issues, so we're going to fix that. Now, first of all, and I'll cover this in another video, we have right up at the top of the basic panel this thing called the Adobe Color Profile. Well, I created a custom profile somewhat nearby, Colorado, Arizona, close enough, for the color here, and look what just happened by having the custom profile. So there's what Adobe Color was giving us. There's a custom profile for out west, and you can see the sky color is so much better. Again, I'll cover this in a separate video, how you create and use these profiles. So now let's take a look at the rest of the tone. Well, first of all, the shadows are obviously dark. Let's bring those all the way up. Let's take a look at the histogram also. We can see the image is slightly underexposed, because even though there are white puffy clouds here, there's nothing over on this far edge of the histogram. So let's bring up the exposure a bit to get those a little bit closer. Now the image on the screen does look like it's going a little extra light, but we're going to need that because we're going to need to make some further adjustments. I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit. That looks a little better. And now we're going to come down to the presence panel. So I'm going to add some texture. I'm going to be close to halfway up. We'll add about half as much clarity. Oh, that's looking a lot better already. And then we'll add some saturation. And there we go. Like it. And vibrance. Now, vibrance is saturation increase just for cool and desaturated colors. So in this particular image, that would mean the greens and the blues. So let's add a little bit more to that. So that I can keep a quick running commentary on where we start and where we finish, I'm going to create a virtual copy of this, which is Command or Control apostrophe, so that we can flip back and forth and even show them on the screen at the same time. Okay, so our virtual copy has been created, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reset that, so take it right back to where we started. And if I hold down the Shift key or the Command key and select both of these, I can then hit the C key. So you see them side by side, the before and after. If I want to get rid of the side panels, I can hit Shift Tab. And if I want to get rid of the gray and see this in just dark, I can hit the L key, which is lights off. So there's partially lights off, there's lights all the way off. So we can see how far we've come so far during our edit. What else does it need? It needs a little bit of contrast. And also, when you do a lot of extreme edits on color, sometimes certain colors seem to shift a little bit. So we're going to jump down here to HSL, which is Hue, Saturation, Luminance, and I'm going to change both the hue and the luminance of the blue sky. So I'm going to click on Hue here, click on this Targeted Adjustment tool, and I'm going to click in here, and if I push up, I can make the sky purple or cyan, and I want to add probably about 12 points or so of blue to give it that more southwestern blue. Great. And if I decide I want to make it a little darker, I can come to Luminance and maybe bring that down a bit. That looks great. Now also the red mountains, I remember them being a little bit more red than that. So I'm going to click on Saturation and get our tool and come right into one of the red spots on the peaks. And I'm going to push up on the saturation on that. So again, that quickly we've gone from here to here. All right, so now we're going to do something else. We're going to do one of the great color things that Lightroom has available to it. We're going to come back up to the basic panel and open that up, because right down here on the bottom, notice there's this thing called soft proofing. So I'm going to click on there, and this is going to allow us to see what a print's going to look like before we even have it printed. Now, personally, I don't like the white background. It influences your feelings about the color. So if you hit Control or right click in here, you then get a menu where you can change it from anywhere from black to white. I'm going to go with the dark gray. I feel that gives you the best representation of the color. So as we come up here, notice that underneath the histogram has changed. We have a whole bunch of different settings, and we have this Create Proof Copy. So the profile here is, where do you intend on sending this image? If you're going to send it to a lab, they're going to want either Adobe RGB or sRGB. Depends on what kind of printer it's being printed on. If it's a conventional photo printer, they're going to probably ask you for sRGB. If it's going to go out to maybe a large format inkjet printer, then Adobe RGB. Notice there is another, we're not going to go there right now, that has to do with custom paper profiles. If you're printing for yourself, we're going to prepare this particular file for sending out to the lab. This is probably going to end up as a large format print, so let's leave it as Adobe RGB. Now we can click on here, perceptual versus relative, to see if there's a difference, and in this case, no. But up on the histogram, you have a monitor icon and a paper icon. Oh, now we've got some stuff going on. So let me turn this one off. The monitor icon means these are the colors that the monitor cannot accurately show you. And as we zoom in, you can see there's some of these dark greens. If I turn this on and off, it's actually kind of a lighter green, that the monitor can't show you. So this is telling you that the monitor is not actually showing you the exact color. Now, you can't actually do much to fix it, but it's a warning that those colors are going to change a little bit. Now this one, the red one, is telling you those are colors that are out of gamut for this color space. It's beyond Adobe RGB. So what are your choices here? Well, you could come down to Use Saturation Luminance again, get the Targeted Adjustment tool. Let's see what happens if we bring down the saturation. I'm going to put it right over where this red is. As we push down, oh, look at that. It was a saturation issue. So these red areas are showing, these are colors that are beyond the Adobe RGB profile. These images are actually captured in Pro Photo RGB, which is a bigger color. So what is the answer? Do we need to concern ourselves with it? Well, you can try to adjust, but it's just a warning that some of these colors, particularly some of those particular greens, are going to shift a bit. They're not going to be quite as intense here. So that is something to consider when doing your edit. Now, before we go any further and actually make adjustments, let's actually create a virtual copy called a proof copy. And that's going to have all of the settings that we make these adjustments for our print. So let's go down to the tone curve and add some contrast to this image. I'm going to darken this up. So if I click on here and push down, notice that those foreground greens are getting a little more pop. They're getting more contrast to them. And conversely, I can come up into the light greens and push up to brighten those up. The sky, you can see where the sky shows up on here. Maybe I want to darken the sky a little bit, just a little bit. So we've got this kind of curve going on now, which has increased the contrast of the image. And I think that's looking a lot better for our print. As I look at this, and since we are looking at a proof copy, which is showing us the image directly through the Adobe RGB profile, maybe I want to add a little bit of saturation to the sky. So let's go back to use saturation luminance, click our tool, and I'm going to click in the sky and push up, and that makes that a little darker. Now I really want to focus the viewer on the middle of the image, on all these beautiful peaks here. So we're going to do a graduated, or a radial filter rather, and I'm going to click and drag across the entire image here, and I want to get this kind of entire middle. Now if I hit the O key, which is the overlay down here, hit the O key, it's showing me, well, it's giving me everything but what I want. So I have to come down below the panel and click on invert, and that's showing me that's what's going to be affected. We may or may not decide to get the sky out of here. Let's see how it looks before we do that. So I'm going to click off the overlay and just increase the exposure a little bit. And maybe add a little bit more clarity in there as well. So we'll put a little more contrast in there. And that's a little too much. So let's bring that back down just a little bit. Okay, let's hit done. And let's go full screen. And that is a beautiful image. That deserves to go on the wall. I do see one last thing here. I can see a car or two in the parking lot in this lower left. So let's just go ahead and cheat a little bit. We're going to get rid of the car. It's this little back of this black car here doesn't bother me as much. It's the red and white ones that just become a visual distraction. So I'm going to get the spot removal tool, make it just a little bigger than the cars. I'm going to change this from clone to heal, and let's just drag across that, and it finds a beautiful spot. And while we're at it, heck, let's get rid of the black car. Oh, and there's a wrong way sign right there, a little red sign. We'll get rid of that as well. It looks a lot better. All right, now let's go full screen with the F key, and now I think we have an image ready for printing. So again, one last time, if I go full screen, there's where our edit is now. That's the image we started with. So now we've got beautiful color, we've got an image that draws you in, and something really ready to be printed. Okay, so now we know our image is the way we want it to print. And by the way, if you look down here at the image title, you see this Adobe RGB relative, which is the proof copy. So now we can export just this file. So I'll click on export, and I'm going to put it in a particular folder. I typically have a folder on my computer called For the Lab. So I do have a folder here called For Printing, and I'm going to create I'm going to choose that. I'm going to create a subfolder for that. So I want to go to the For Printing, and then I'm going to put my dates on it so I know these are the images I want to send. I'm going to put it in a subfolder, and I'm going to say color prints for the lab. I'm not going to rename it. Image format. So we have JPEG, PSD, TIFF, etc. This is something you ask your lab. They're either going to want a JPEG or a TIFF. For a first generation file, really a JPEG is not going to hurt anything. I'll make it a JPEG. And what color space do they want it in? Well, we've already proofed this to Adobe RGB, so that's the space we want it into. I don't want it to resize. I don't want any output sharpening. None of that matters because the printer is going to print it depending on the size that we place the order for. So that's something you can't get in trouble with. Don't mess with this. Don't worry about this resolution number. It has nothing to do with what you're doing. And let's just click on Export. So I can actually tab over to my desktop. So on my desktop, there's my for printing folder. And here's the color prints for the lab. And here's the image. I probably should have given it a name. But if I hit the space bar on my Mac, I can bring up a kind of a thumbnail of this, and it will show me the image that is sitting there waiting to be sent up to the lab. And there we go. There's our image waiting to be printed. And since I am working on a calibrated system, I know that this is the print I'm going to get back from the lab. So all I have to do is go to my lab now and upload this file. And we'll get a print like this back. And it's going to look wonderful. So one more time, not too bad going from there to there, all just using Adobe Lightroom. Now I can hold up prints all day, and I know it's going to be hard on a video to tell really how good they are. All I can tell you is that when looked under daylight conditions, either be it daylight actually or a daylight bulb, they look spectacular. They're very close matches to what I see in the monitor. As long as you understand that these are two different ways of looking at a print. If I have a print on paper, well, that's reflected light from whatever the light is that's shining on it. These things are backlit LED displays. So it's a different way of transmitting light. That said, within the limitations of the two viewing methods, you're going to get the best match that you can. And in order to do that again, you've got to have a calibrated monitor. And again, I had my little friend here, the X-Rite i1 Display Studio. Great little device, easy to use. First thing to do if you're serious about color. So I hope you had some fun. I hope you saw how easy it is to really bring back the color vibrancy and tone in your images with both Lightroom and Photoshop. Thanks for watching. See you online again soon. Bye-bye.